I got the invitation from Drew about 2 weeks ago. It came through email, short, casual, the way he always was. Cabin weekend? Just like old times. Bring beer. Attached was a blurry photo of the place, the same rundown cabin tucked into the woods of northern Michigan, just outside of Alpena. We've been going up there since college. Hunting trips, poker nights, post-breakup retreats. It was a tradition that had faded over the years, like everything else. I hadn't seen Drew in nearly 3 years. Not since his dad passed, and he moved upstate full-time to fix up the cabin, as he put it. I figured this invite was his way of reconnecting. Maybe we all needed that. I left work early Friday, loaded the truck, and made the drive out. By the time I got close, the sun was dropping behind the trees, turning the gravel road into a corridor of shadows. Reception was dead by the time I turned off onto the cabin trail, which was exactly how I remembered it. The place looked almost unchanged, the same slanted porch, the same rusted fire pit ring, the same crooked deer skull nailed above the front door. Drew met me out front with a grin and a bear hug. He looked a little thinner than I remembered, maybe tired, but he still had that same loud laugh, that same easy energy. "Dude," he said, grabbing the beer from my hands. "You made it. Let's get drunk." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly tidy, cleaner than I'd ever seen it. The walls had been patched, the fireplace redone, even the kitchen had new counters. He told me he'd been living there full-time, working odd jobs in town and putting sweat into the place. I noticed he hadn't invited anyone else, none of the old crew. "Nah," he said, waving it off. "They all got kids now, or real lives. This one's just us." We drank. A lot. We grilled steaks on the back porch, smoked a few joints, laughed about the old days, dumb shit we'd done, girls we barely remembered. That one night we swore we heard something howling out in the woods. It felt like we'd never left. By midnight, we were both hammered. Drew disappeared for a while to grab more firewood. I passed out on the couch waiting for him. I woke up the next morning to silence. The fire had died, the cabin was cold, and Drew was nowhere in sight. At first, I figured he'd gone out for something, but his truck was still out front. His boots were by the door. No note, no phone, nothing. I called out a few times, checked the outhouse, the shed, nothing. Then I saw it on the kitchen table. A folded piece of paper that hadn't been there the night before. My name was written on the outside in strange, spidery handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, just 5 words. "It's time. Back to the basement." At first, I thought it was a joke. Some dumb callback to one of our old drinking games or college dares. But the longer I stared at the handwriting, the more unsettled I felt. It wasn't Drew's. It wasn't even close. The basement. I'd completely forgotten the cabin even had one. It wasn't finished, more of a root cellar. Really. Dirt floor, low ceiling, a single naked bulb. We never used it for anything except storage. I remembered it being creepy even back then. Still, I opened the trapdoor in the pantry and climbed down the narrow wooden steps. It was cold and smelled like damp earth and rusted metal. The bulb flickered when I pulled the chain, casting weak yellow light across the room. I saw some old shelves, boxes of tools, a folded camping cot. Nothing else. No sign of Drew. But something was off. The far wall, it looked wrong. Too clean. Too smooth. I walked over and knocked. Hollow. A false wall. I ran my fingers along the edge until I found a small notch. A latch. I hesitated, then pulled. The wall swung open. Behind it was a narrow hallway I'd never seen before. Dirt walls, barely wide enough to walk through, and pitch black. It led deeper underground, into what looked like a tunnel. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't part of the original cabin. It couldn't have been. Drew would have told me. But something about that note, about the stillness of the house, made me step inside. The tunnel was longer than it should have been, maybe 30 or 40 feet in. And at the end, it opened into a small underground room. That's when the smell hit me. Rot. Old blood. Something metallic and wet. I covered my nose and stepped in slowly, phone flashlight scanning the room. There was a table, metal, stained dark, and ropes. Chains bolted into the wall. A single chair facing the corner. And a camera. A video camera, mounted on a tripod, pointed at the chair. I didn't hear anyone. Didn't see anyone. But I knew, with a kind of crawling certainty, that something awful had happened here. Maybe a long time ago. Maybe not. I turned to leave and saw writing on the back of the door. Scratched deep into the wood in the same spidery style as the note. He brought them here. I bolted, climbed out of that tunnel, slammed the false wall shut. and nearly broke the ladder getting out of the basement. Back upstairs, I grabbed my bag and keys and ran for the truck. I didn't even look back at the cabin, except the truck wouldn't start. The engine made a clicking sound, then died. Battery drained. I popped the hood, but everything looked fine, like someone had just quietly killed it. My phone still had no signal. I considered walking, but the nearest gas station was 15 miles out. I wasn't even sure I could retrace the trail without GPS, so I went back inside just to grab a flashlight and maybe a weapon. That's when I heard something. Footsteps, coming from upstairs. Slow, deliberate. I froze. I hadn't even realized the cabin had an attic, but the creaking above me made it clear someone was up there. Moving. Drew. I called out. My voice cracked. No answer. Just 2 more heavy steps. I grabbed a fireplace poker and slowly backed toward the front door. That's when I saw the second note, taped to the inside of the door. You shouldn't have left the basement. I ran. Didn't even think. Just took off down the trail, sprinting until my legs gave out. I spent the next few hours making my way through the woods until I finally found a main road. A couple picked me up and drove me to the nearest sheriff's station. I told them everything. Or most of it. I left out the notes. The tunnel. I knew how it sounded. A deputy went out there that night. He radioed in that the cabin was empty, no sign of anyone. He said there wasn't even a basement door in the pantry, just floorboards. They called Drew's number. It was disconnected. I never heard from him again. A few months later, I drove back out there with a buddy, just to prove I wasn't crazy. But when we got to where the trail should have been, it was gone. No turnoff, no mailbox, nothing but endless trees. As if the whole place had never been there at all. Sometimes I still dream about that note. The way it said, back to the basement. Like I'd been there before. Like I'd never left. Story 2. It had been 7 years since I'd last seen Mason. We were close once, roommates in college, camping buddies after. Even tried launching a podcast together that fizzled out within months. But after his fiancée died in a car accident, Mason basically dropped off the map. Quit his job, sold most of his stuff, and disappeared to live full-time in his uncle's old hunting cabin up in Vermont. I texted him a few times that first year. Never got a reply. Then last month, out of nowhere, he emailed me. Subject line just said, "You should come up. Got something to show you." No details. Just an address and the words, like old times. No signal up here. Bring boots. I stared at it for a while, debating. It felt strange, like something he'd have written in college, back before everything in his life shattered. But I couldn't shake the gut feeling that something was off. Still, part of me felt like I owed it to him. Maybe this was his way of reaching out again. So I packed up my Jeep and made the drive up. It was a 4-hour trip through increasingly narrow roads and thick pine forest. The last few miles were just gravel and mud, winding through deep woods until the trees swallowed the sky. I passed one other car the entire way. The cabin sat at the edge of a lake, crooked and half sunk into the hillside. It looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The porch sagged. The chimney leaned. A wind chime made of keys and bones clinked in the breeze. Mason met me at the door with a tired smile and a tight hug. He looked thinner than I remembered. His hair was longer, beard thick and untrimmed. I sunken with something I couldn't quite name. "Place is a dump, huh?" he said, like it was a joke. Inside wasn't much better. Dust everywhere, weird hand-carved figurines on every shelf, and a damp smell that clung to the floorboards. He offered me a beer, and we spent most of the night drinking by the wood stove, catching up on surface-level stuff. Work, old friends, the kind of things you talk about when you're dodging deeper subjects. I kept waiting for him to bring up the email, what he wanted to show me, but he never did. By midnight, we were both buzzed. Mason started dozing off in the old recliner, so I called it and crashed in the guest room, a cold little side space with a cot and faded curtains that barely covered the window. I woke up sometime early morning, not to a sound, but to stillness. The fire had gone out. The cabin was dead quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. I got up to use the bathroom and noticed Mason's recliner was empty. No blanket. No boots. He was just gone. I called out. Walked through the living room. Checked the kitchen. No sign of him. His truck keys were still hanging by the door. Then I saw it, lying on the kitchen counter. A small slip of paper, folded once. No envelope. My name was written across the front in jagged, unsteady handwriting. Inside it said, "You said yes once. Come back to the basement." I stood there, hungover and shivering, reading that over and over. The words made no sense. I'd never been to the basement. Hell, I didn't even know the place had one. That's when I noticed something strange about the floor behind the pantry shelves, a square outline in the wood I hadn't seen before. I moved the shelves aside and found a trapdoor. It groaned when I opened it. The air that came up smelled like mildew and burnt metal. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed down. The basement was cramped, with stone walls slick from moisture. It was colder than it had any right to be, like walking into the inside of a tomb. At first, there was nothing there. Just old tools, a broken rocking chair, and shelves of dusty mason jars filled with something. Animal bones, maybe, or dried roots. I couldn't tell. But in the back corner, I saw it, a second door. Heavy, wood reinforced with rusted iron. No lock, just a chain looped around the handle. And carved into the door, not written, carved, were the same 5 words from the note. Come back to the basement. I should have left. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to go back up those stairs and drive. But something pulled at me. Curiosity, maybe, or something worse. I unwrapped the chain and opened the door. Behind it was another room. A wide, circular stone chamber I swear should have been too big to fit under the cabin. In the center was an old metal table. Shackles on either side. Dried, dark stains on the floor beneath it. And beside the table, something covered in a black tarp. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I pulled the tarp away slowly and found an old tape recorder. One of those clunky 80s models with big buttons and a plastic speaker grill. Sitting beside it was a dusty cassette labeled simply Mason 3. I pushed play. At first, just static, then breathing, and then his voice, warped, panicked. I let it out again, Mason whispered. I told it no this time, but it still came. I thought you had to say yes. I thought. The audio crackled, then rose into a high-pitched screech before cutting off. Then silence. I backed away, heart pounding, breathing too fast. That's when I noticed the second recorder on the shelf nearby. And another tape. This one said Nick 1. My name. I didn't touch it. I turned and ran up the stairs, slammed the trap door shut, and moved the shelf back in front of it. I started shouting for Mason, pacing the house, looking out every window, searching the woods, but it was like he'd vanished. Eventually, I found his journal. It was stuffed between some books under his bed, half burned at the edges. Most of it was gibberish, strange symbols, drawings of doors and spiral staircases, pages and pages of the same words written over and over. I never said yes. I never said yes. But in the middle, there was one entry I understood. He said yes. He came back. I just had to invite him again. That was a week ago. I never found Mason. I told myself I imagined that room, that it was the alcohol, or the weird energy of the place, or just grief catching up to me after all these years. But when I got back home, I checked my email. There was a new message. No sender, no subject, just one line. It's your turn now. And attached to it, a grainy photo of me, asleep on the cot in that cabin, taken from the doorway. I live alone. Story 3. I hadn't heard from Evan in over 4 years. Not since the wedding fell apart. Not since he'd left LA, sold his half of the business, and vanished up north somewhere. Word was he'd bought a chunk of land in Oregon and gone off-grid. I figured he needed space, maybe to grieve, maybe to reset. I never pushed. So when I got his text, simple, no punctuation, just, you should come up this weekend. It felt weird. No pleasantries. No context. Just an address pinned to a location with no nearby roads. And beneath that, another message. Cabin's ready now. I stared at it for a while before answering. Something about it didn't sit right with me. But curiosity got the better of caution. I owed him that much, I guess. It took nearly 10 hours to get there. After passing through a one-light town called Westridge, I lost signal completely. The rest of the drive was dirt road, the kind that coils through dense forest and starts to feel like it's looping on itself. The cabin finally emerged from the trees like something half-forgotten. Tall, dark pine logs stacked neatly, a wraparound porch, and a stone chimney that bled smoke into the gray sky. It was nicer than I expected, like he'd actually followed through on those Pinterest-fueled cabin plans we used to joke about. Evan met me out front. He looked older. Not just older like time had passed, but older in a way that felt sunken. Pale. Weathered. His hair was longer than I remembered, and his eyes didn't meet mine for more than a second. Glad you came, he said, smiling too tightly. Been waiting. We spent the evening catching up around a fire inside. The cabin was warm and well-kept, surprisingly so. He said he built most of it himself, with some help from locals he never named. There was no TV, no internet, not even a radio, just the crackle of the fire and the endless sound of wind outside. At some point, Evan disappeared into the back room and came out with an old wooden box. He opened it and pulled out a bottle of something dark and unlabeled. "Found this buried in the foundation," he said, half joking. "Figured it's only right we drink it. I shouldn't have, but I did." We finished most of the bottle, then passed out sometime after midnight. I took the couch. When I woke up, everything was quiet. No wind, no fire, and no Evan. At first, I figured he was out chopping wood or something, but his boots were still by the door. His coat was still hanging. No sign of him outside either. No trails in the snow. No footprints. I walked through the cabin calling his name. Every room was empty. Then I saw the envelope. It was lying on the kitchen counter where the bottle had been. My name written across the front in ink that had run slightly, like it had been damp when written. The handwriting wasn't his. It was too clean, precise. Inside was a single piece of torn parchment, the kind you'd see in a museum. And on it, in the same perfect script, were the words, "Your invitation is renewed. Return to where you agreed." I read it 3 times before setting it down. I didn't understand. None of it made sense. And that's when I noticed something I'd missed the night before, a trapdoor tucked into the floor beside the wood stove. The rug had been shifted just enough to reveal the corner of it. It looked old. Iron hinges. Worn handle. I knelt, hesitated, then pulled it open. A narrow wooden ladder led into darkness. The air rising from it smelled like rot and iron. I climbed down slowly, flashlight in hand. The basement was bigger than expected, dug deep into the earth, with stone walls and a concrete floor that had cracked in several places. There were shelves of canned goods, old tools, and a massive wooden door at the far end. Heavy, sealed with a bolt that looked newer than everything else. Carved into the wood were the words, "You said yes." I stared at it for a long time, trying to recall, trying to understand. I had no memory of agreeing to anything. I didn't even know there was a basement. That's when I saw the second note, nailed to the wall beside the door. "He brought you once. You came willingly. The door remembers." I felt sick. My mouth was dry. I turned to leave, and that's when I noticed something else in the far corner. A third door. Smaller. Slightly open. I should have run. I know that now. But something in me needed to see. Inside was a small room. And in it, a cot. A desk. A journal. And bones. Not human. Not exactly. Twisted things, with elongated joints and curled fingers. Like something halfway between man and something else. The journal was Evan's. I recognized his handwriting immediately. The last entry read, "I can't hold it anymore. The door needs someone new. I told it about you. I'm sorry." I ran, back up the ladder, out the front door. But the woods weren't the same. There was no road, no trail, nothing but endless pine in every direction, as if the cabin had moved while I slept. The sky overhead had darkened, even though my watch said 10 a.m. I screamed his name until my throat was raw, walked in circles until the snow came down hard enough to blind me. Eventually, I made it back to the cabin. It was still empty. No Evan, no bottle, no envelope. But on the front porch, nailed to the door, was a fresh note. "One more yes is all it needs." That was 3 days ago. The firewood hasn't run out. The food stays fresh. I don't know how. Every time I try to leave, I end up back here. And every morning, there's a new note waiting. Always the same words. Always the same invitation. Story 4. I didn't even know the guy that well. His name was Tyler. We worked together for about 6 months at a fabrication shop in Pennsylvania. He was the quiet type, kind of intense, but friendly enough when you got him talking. We shared a few night shifts, grabbed beers a couple times. That was about it. Then he quit out of nowhere and disappeared. A year later, he sent me a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten letter, in this neat, careful script, like he'd spend hours on it. It started with, "I know we weren't that close, but I need you to come up here. I've been building something, and I think it's finally ready. Please, just trust me. You're the only one I could think to ask." Inside was a small hand-drawn map, showing a dirt road off a logging route up near Tionesta. No address, no house number, just turn at the marked tree and an X at the end of a winding trail. Part of me thought it was a prank, but another part of me was just curious. He didn't strike me as the type to joke around, and something in the tone of that letter stuck with me. It felt desperate. So the next weekend, I drove out. It took 4 hours, most of it on increasingly narrow, washed-out roads that hadn't been maintained in years. My cell signal dropped 2 towns back. The marked tree was real. It had a strip of red cloth nailed around the middle like a ribbon. The trail beyond it was barely drivable, more like an overgrown path through the woods. Eventually, I saw it, a small, hand-built structure in a clearing more bunker than cabin. Low to the ground, sloped roof, no windows. The door was open. A single lantern burned just inside. Tyler stepped out as I pulled up. He looked rough. His face was gaunt, and his clothes hung loose like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. But his eyes lit up when he saw me. "You came," he said, like he couldn't believe it. He didn't hug me, didn't shake my hand, just motioned me inside. The place was sparse. Bedroll in the corner, tools stacked neatly, a handmade desk, and a thick wooden hatch in the floor, bolted shut. He cooked us some canned chili, and we talked for a while. Or rather, he did. He told me he'd been out there almost 2 years, that he'd stopped talking to his family, that the cabin had started as a project, a kind of escape, but it had come to him while he was building. I asked what it meant, and he went quiet. "Not a voice," he said finally. "More like a suggestion, like remembering something you never lived." He said the door in the floor had always been there, even before he built the cabin. He found it while clearing the land, a metal handle sticking out of the dirt. At first, it was just a hole. Then it became something more. I laughed it off, asked if he was messing with me. He didn't smile. "I just needed someone else to see it," he said, "to know it's real." We sat in silence after that. Eventually, I crashed on a cot near the stove while he sat by the hatch, staring at it like he was waiting for something. I woke up hours later to the sound of the bolt sliding open. The hatch was up. Tyler was gone. The lantern on the desk had been moved. And on the desk, there was a piece of paper, thick, yellowed parchment that hadn't been there before. On it, in small blocky letters, "You remember now. Come below." I didn't remember anything. But reading that line filled me with a kind of hollow nausea I can't explain. Like part of me wanted to go down there. I walked to the hatch and looked in. A narrow tunnel, carved into the earth, descending into total darkness. Wooden planks reinforced the walls like an old mine shaft. I could hear something down there, a faint, wet sound, like dripping. Or breathing. I called for Tyler. Nothing. I should have left. Driven back and told myself it was a bad dream. But I couldn't. Something about that note. I climbed down. The tunnel led to a wide circular chamber with walls made of rough stone. The floor was damp, but smooth. Smoothed over like it had been walked across for years. In the center, a chair. And behind it, a door. 7 feet tall, black, with no hinges or handle. Just flush against the stone wall like it had grown there. The door was wrong. It hurt to look at it directly. My vision blurred around the edges. The air buzzed. My skin prickled. I turned to leave, but the tunnel was gone. Just wall. Like I'd never come from that direction at all. I screamed, pounded at the stone. Nothing. Then I saw the second note, pinned to the chair with a bone-handled knife. "The second invitation is your own." That's when I remembered. Not everything, but flashes. Feelings. This wasn't the first time I'd seen the door. I'd been here before. I saw Tyler's face in my mind, younger, laughing, years ago, and a wooden box between us, something we'd buried together during a drunken camping trip, swearing we'd never open it. And I remembered what was inside. A piece of the same parchment. Same handwriting. Same message. Only back then, it said, "The first invitation has been accepted." I think Tyler never built this place. I think it was already here, and we just gave it permission. The light's almost gone now. The walls are shifting. The door is opening. I don't know what's on the other side. I just know that somewhere in all of this, I said yes. And now it's my turn to invite someone else.